Inside New Orleans Sports with Eric Asher is underwritten by...
At Villere's Florist, we deliver the magic of flowers 7 days a week to the North Shore and South Shore in the New Orleans area. Whether it's for birthday parties, baby celebrations, Villere's provides colorful floral displays for all. With a store full of fresh-cut flowers, exotic tropical flowers, orchids, roses, and even fruit baskets, our goal is to make your vision a reality. Villere's Florist, proudly serving Louisiana since 1969.
Dave Miette Insurance Agency, 504-556-0809 or davemietteINSagency.com.
For over 48 years, Southern Tires and Auto Repair has provided services across the New Orleans metro area. Southern Tires offers a range of tires for all vehicles and ATVs. We also have a full suite of auto repair options, including brake repair, rim repair, custom exhaust, steering and suspension, tire siping, and so much more. Southern Tires and Auto Repair, 2550 Hickory Avenue in Metairie.
Cnc Drugs is a family-owned pharmacy that's been serving Southeast Louisiana for over 50 years. Whether you need help taking care of an elderly family member, a growing child, or even a pet, Cnc provides patient-centered care for your entire family. Cnc Drugs, large enough to serve you, small enough to know you. Locations in Mandeville and Araby.
Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of Inside New Orleans Sports. I'm your host, Eric Asher, live from our Pontchartrain Production Studios on another beautiful day here in Old New Orleans. And of course, today we'll talk about all the home teams. We'll talk Saints, Pelicans, we'll talk LSU baseball and football, we'll talk Tulane football, and we'll touch maybe a little bit on the coaching situation over at Tulane since, as of right now, Coach Jewett has not been re-upped. And that's kind of curious considering, again, the season's been over for a while. We'll get into that. To break it down for us, one of the best we have, award-winning journalist and author, Les East joins us on the program. Les, how are you?
Doing well, Eric. How are you?
Good to have you back. Always good to have you on the program. And before we get started, tell the folks a little bit about who you're writing for, what's going on, and then I want to show everybody about this brand new book that's in paperback as well.
Well, thanks. It's good to be here again. You know, we're gearing up for football like everybody else. Crescent City Sports, I just earlier this week posted part 5 of my annual series leading up to training camp for the Saints. It'll be 8 parts in total. You can go back and read earlier installments if you missed them, and each Monday there'll be a new one leading up to the cusp of training camp, and we certainly have a lot of high school, LSU, Tulane, state football information there as well. I've been focused on the Saints. Saturday Down South, I posted something this week on the top 10 candidates for Defensive Player of the Year in the SEC, and a name at the top should be familiar to local fans. So that's, I believe, on the website now, and we'll be kicking into high gear.
So that's a
LSU.
Local player, but maybe not necessarily playing for a local team?
No, it's playing for a local team.
Okay, all right, okay.
So I think that'll be interesting, and so we'll be gearing up with LSU and the entire SEC at SaturdayDownSouth.com.
Beautiful. And of course, we've talked about it a lot on this program over the last few months. It's finally in paperback. Talk a little bit about your book.
Yeah, thanks. It's called Donkeys, Elephants, and Giraffes, as I think people can probably read. It's a novel. It's about politics and the media, but I think relevant to this audience, it also talks a lot about similarities between sports and politics. And it's available as an ebook and has been for a while, and now it's out in paperback at all the major platforms online. If you go to Barnes & Noble, Amazon.com, or just Google the title,
Yes.
You'll see all the different ways you can find it.
Any book signings coming up?
Not at the moment, but we expect to have some in the not too distant future. I'll keep you posted.
And of course, whether it's on this TV show or our radio show, we'll let you know what's going on there. Let's start off with the New Orleans Saints, and I know a lot of people always start with the Pelicans again. But we'll start with the Saints this time around. We got enough time to get into those Pelicans a little bit later on the program. We're just a few weeks from camp. It's amazing again how and expecting full stadiums in the NFL this year. We were just discussing about camp, whether again the fans and the media will be allowed at camp this year. Last year obviously was a situation where it was pool reporters only that were there. And we start looking now, kind of diving into, again, how this team is going to look post Drew Brees, which is, again, going to be huge. First of all, I don't know if you can replace a Brees for what he has meant, not just to the organization, but also to the city. I think that when you look at him in terms of, again, his leadership in the locker room, being a guy that's kind of carried the baton for this team since he came here in 06. You look at the culture, again, a guy that was really a culture bearer for this team, a guy that, as the new team players came in, he was a guy that was looked to. There was a lot of feeling in that locker room. They didn't want to let Drew Brees down, okay, either it's offense or defense. And then, of course, his play on the field. The pre-snap reads, knowing where to go with the football. Even though, again, maybe physically his ability was declining, mentally he was as sharp as ever. And, again, we don't know how many bad situations he got the Saints out of simply because of, again, his knowledge of this offense. And this offense that evolved over time, which was, again, Drew Brees and Sean Payton coming together and kind of putting it together since 06 and it kind of evolving. Why don't you take it from here? I don't know if you can, and this is as a leadership or again on the field, replace him, but give us your thoughts.
Yeah, you've hit on the central theme, actually, of my series previewing training camp. I'm calling it the biggest transition for the organization since 2006, when they came back from San Antonio and Sean Payton and Drew Brees arrived at the same time. That this is the biggest transition period they've gone through since then. You don't really replace Drew Brees. Obviously, somebody else has to play quarterback, but I think you've hit on really the central issue there. They're not replacing the 06, the 09, the 11, or even the 2017 Brees. They're replacing the 2019, 2020 Brees. And they won 8 out of 9 games when he didn't play in those 2 seasons. So as far as the overall productivity, it's not as daunting as it might sound when you're replacing the most prolific passer in NFL history. Yeah. But you talked about all the intangibles. Nobody's going to replace that this year or even down the road. That's not something somebody is going to grow into. Drew Brees was unique to this point. If we ever see another one like him, we'll be very lucky, and it'll probably be a long time down the road. I do think whether it's Jameis Winston or Taysom Hill, there's a good chance that the offense and the team can be nearly or as successful. They may do it a little bit differently, but I think they can still compete for a division championship. The thing that you can't really anticipate, and this ties in with the intangibles you were talking about, it seemed like once or twice a year. And I'm thinking back to the Carolina game last year in the Dome, the Houston game early in the 2019 season, when the Saints take the field, they've just lost a lead. They may be behind, they may be tied. There's 30 seconds, 60 seconds, 90 seconds, maybe no timeouts. Right. And they get into the huddle, and the players know, we got this, because number 9 is running the show. And he hits Michael Thomas, and he hits Michael Thomas, and he dumps to Alvin Kamara, and he hands off, and Will Lutz kicks a field goal, and they go home a winner. And you're not quite sure how it happened, but you know it happened because of Drew Brees. I don't know if you can expect Jameis Winston or Taysom Hill to be able to produce that well in those crucial do-or-die situations that pop up periodically during the season. Yes. And maybe that costs them a game or two each season. But overall, I think the productivity will be very comparable. It's just those crucial situations that decide games where he made the difference because of who he was,
Yes.
and he's not going to be there.
Talk about the void. I don't want to call it a devoid of leadership within the locker room, but you need other guys to emerge now as the leaders, much like Breeze was.
Yeah, and they do have some candidates for that. Certainly DeMario Davis is probably the biggest, has the highest profile
Yes.
among other players on the team. But guys like Teron Armstead,
Right.
I think, is a big leader.
In the
that
last year of his
locker
deal,
room.
though.
That's true. So we don't know down the road what that means. I think Alvin Kamara, in more of a leading by example
Yeah.
role, is one of those
He
players.
was a lot more verbal last year, right? I mean,
Yeah.
we saw him being a little bit more demonstrative in terms of leadership role, right?
Yeah, and I think that he's growing into that. That was his fourth year. And, Cam Jordan is sort of a leader in his own way,
Yes.
a little more lighthearted approach.
Right.
But I think because of who he is, he has the players' respect. Certainly Malcolm Jenkins is a leader. So I think there are people who can step into that void. And I'm not sure from a football standpoint, Drew was the unquestioned leader from the day he signed that contract in March of 2006. But with the comments during last offseason about not being able to support a teammate who ever knelt for the national anthem, I think maybe a little bit of luster was lost in the locker room in the overall picture. When they were between the white lines, nothing changed, I don't think. But in terms of the culture in the locker room, the before practice, after practice, during the week, I'm not sure that he had quite the same individual role last year that he might have had earlier in his career. And I think the arrival or the return of Malcolm Jenkins, for example, and DeMario Davis and some of the other players, I think had already started to take command of that situation. And I think they'll be able to do that seamlessly.
How does this offense evolve without Breeze now? Whether it's going to be Winston or Hill, and again, I would think there are going to be two different type of offensive styles depending on who the quarterback's going to be. I think where again you could lean on Breeze to be the guy. Now maybe you lean on other guys like a Kamara, maybe a little bit more on a Michael Thomas. That offensive line is going to be interesting to see how it plays out because, Breeze got the ball out so quickly and he saw things quickly. Pre-snap reads, making the line calls. Again, now this and really getting the ball out quickly, not going deep. Both these quarterbacks coming in have an opportunity to be able to go a little bit deeper than Breeze did because they have stronger arms. So again, you're holding the ball a little bit longer than maybe Breeze did. So the offensive line will be attested. They're looked at as one of the best offensive lines in the NFL, and rightly so. But how much was a byproduct of Breeze getting the ball out quickly, knowing pre-snap reads, and not maybe going deep with the ball, as to oppose that maybe what we see now, which may be a little bit of a different offense going forward, which is going to put a little more pressure on that offensive line.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the key things is that the understanding, the thorough and complete understanding and ability to process everything in a split second that Drew Brees had was very, very rare. And it's unrealistic to expect either Jameis Winston or Taysom Hill to come in and start and be able to do it the way he did it. So that's going to be an adjustment. It's going to be an adjustment for the offensive line. The offense is the offense, and Sean Payton and Pete Carmichael have gone to great lengths to say there are core principles that we're going to stick with.
Yes.
But there will be tweaking. The Breeze version, the Winston version, the Hill version are all a little bit different. As you mentioned, they'll be able to throw the ball deeper, more effectively.
Yes.
And if that happens, if they're successful with it, that'll make it easier to run the ball by
Yes.
softening up the defense. I don't know if they can lean on Alvin Kamara much more than they have.
Right.
He had almost 1,000 yards last year rushing, missing a game, and he's had over 80 catches every year. But he will certainly be a huge part. Getting Mike Thomas back healthy will make a big difference. But Winston will be able to stretch the defense a lot more. If Taysom's in there, he'll be able to stretch it, and also the RPO becomes a part of the offense if he's the starter. So it'll be a little bit different. And I think as much as he hates to lose Drew Brees, I really think Sean Payton is probably got the adrenaline flowing.
He's energized.
Because he has all the confidence in the world in his offense. He tailored it to Teddy Bridgewater for 5 games, to Taysom Hill for 4 games, and he went 8-1. So I don't think there's a doubt in his mind that he can tailor it, and whoever the starter is will have a lot more preparation time than those backups had the last 2 years. So I think he's sort of relishing, since he's been forced into this situation, he's kind of relishing the opportunity to kind of reconfigure the offense a little bit and work with some clay and mold it differently. But it is going to be a challenge mentally as much as anything.
And I don't mean to be disparaging, but it's a fact. Brees was a finished product when he came to New Orleans for the most part. Okay? Peyton has never had to cultivate a new quarterback, groom a quarterback, take a guy from the draft and again have him as maybe an heir apparent. It's never happened here. He's had a few guys that he's brought in that have been perennial backups, that went on to other teams. Maybe they got a cup of coffee as a starter. Most of those guys were backups for the most part. He's in a unique situation now because he has that kind of lump of clay with Taysom Hill, who again he's brought in, and again maybe a different style of offense. He's got a guy that again has been turnover prone in Winston, and a lot of people believe that he's got the Midas touch, and that again can get Winston and kind of rein him in and not allow him to be again the guy that was turning the ball over as much as he was throwing touchdowns at Tampa Bay. It'll be interesting to see again how that plays out. Is there a little bit of pressure on Peyton here? When you're coming off a Brees and going into a Winston/Hill, or again, this is just 1 year, maybe down the line, having to be able to develop a quarterback here in New Orleans.
Yeah, I think so. There is pressure to do that because he hasn't had to do that before as a head coach. When he and Drew were a perfect combination. But you're right, Drew was, if not a finished product, he was very well developed when he got here, and certainly Sean helped him to grow even more.
I would agree with that.
But he had a lot to work with when Drew got here. I think the development aspect comes more into play with Taysom Hill than it does with Jameis Winston, and potentially a lot more down the road if neither one of these guys is quarterback after this season. But Jameis Winston has started 4 or 5 years in Tampa. The last time he started, he threw for 5,000 yards and a boatload of touchdowns. So the turnovers are a concern, but he is pretty far advanced as an NFL quarterback. He needs to be polished to some degree, and I think Sean Payton can do that. So it is different, but I think the main thing is getting Jameis Winston to make better decisions, be more accurate with the football. And I think the year he spent with Drew is going to be helpful. I think he's probably a more savvy quarterback today than he was when he arrived in New Orleans because he was around Drew all that time. Not to mention Peyton and Pete Carmichael and Joe Lombardi, who's no longer there.
Also the LASIK surgery. I don't think you can downplay that. There were times when we were watching Tampa games and you're going, where's he throwing the ball? Okay, and the LASIK surgery should help him in terms of being able to see downfield, and you would hope that was a byproduct. You would hope that would have been the byproduct of the turnovers. Let's talk about concerns going into camp, and I'm talking about from a position standpoint. Obviously, cornerback right now is a real question mark. You've got Demario Davis, and then you've got a lot of unproven either rookies or guys with minimal experience at the linebacker position. Defensive end, opposite Cam Jordan, is still a question mark. Davenport, Granderson, we can go into, they brought the new guy in from Kansas City. It's still a question mark. And then defensive tackle, you lost Malcolm Brown. You've got 2 guys that are undrafted free agents that ultimately, again, will have to be able to man that position. Quarterback is a big question mark, okay? And then you can throw in wide receiver because of the lack of a real playmaker behind Michael Thomas. And then tight end, even though Troutman we believe is going to be a really good tight end, it's still an unknown. For the first time in a long time, there are multiple positions on this team where you go, wait a minute, We're not as strong. They're not as strong as they used to be, and yet in some cases they have not even filled those positions yet, and we're only a couple weeks from camp. Give us your thoughts.
Yeah, and I would add two other things to that.
Go ahead.
No Thomas Morstead.
That's a great point.
And missing a punter normally doesn't seem like that's a big deal. Missing Thomas Morstead's a big deal.
He was a weapon.
Yeah, he's the only punter I've ever come across in my life who was a leader.
Right, that's a
on the
great
team.
point. Yeah.
But the other one is right guard. Cesar Ruiz is going to be the right guard. They don't have Nick Easton as an insurance policy.
Right.
There's every reason to believe Cesar Ruiz will be better than he was as a rookie and might well be a good player, but there's some uncertainty there. And that's really what this training camp and off season is all about, is the uncertainty, not just of Drew Brees being gone, but these 6 or 7 other positions that lost veteran players that were either starters or key contributors, and the uncertainty of how reliable the replacements are going to be. And as you pointed out, in some cases the replacement might not even be there yet, particularly the starting cornerback opposite Marshawn Lattimore. So there's a lot of uncertainty there. You know, I wrote this week in the series that the defensive line was the deepest position on the team last year, and it suffered the most losses during the offseason. So how well they're able to replace Trey Hendrickson, the leader in sacks last year, and Malcolm Brown, who was traded, who was one of the most underappreciated players on the team, and Sheldon Rankins, who was a leader in the locker room and on the field. That's a lot to replace. If they can somehow have the same kind of depth they had last year, and they have a lot of young talent there, then they can be okay. But Marcus Davenport has to have a breakout season. The rookie Peyton Turner has to contribute somehow. Shai Tuttle has to continue to develop. Malcolm Roach, Carl Granderson, who's shown some potential. All those guys, and then you hope Cam Jordan has a bounce back. He was coming off the core muscle surgery last year. I think that hampered him. So defensive line is a huge area, but I think really what this season comes down to, along with the quarterback, is there, I think, 9 players from the last 3 drafts, not counting this draft, the last 3 drafts, second, third, fourth year players who are going to have to pick up a lot of that lost productivity from veterans who left.
Great point.
And you have Caden Ellis and you have Zach Baum at linebacker, in addition to Pete Werner that they drafted from Ohio State. And so there are, I believe it's 9 different players at different positions. I would put C.J. Gardner-Johnson in that class also, even though he's played pretty well. So those guys, if most of those guys make a leap this year to fill in those voids, then they can keep humming. But if the majority of those guys aren't up to the challenge, then I can see them sliding back a bit. So there are a lot of young players. Traquan Smith is another one who may be as big as anybody on the roster.
Yeah, I would agree. You know, it's interesting because when you look at the team and you compare the roster this year to last year, and you see the losses, you know, massive losses, guys that again that will go on to their new teams and be factors for those teams. I mean, again, the great thing about the last few years is even when all the cap issues they've had incredible depth across the board. The depth now will suffer if, as you mentioned, those younger players do not step up and be able to again fulfill the roles that again the players that have departed once had. I am a little surprised that again Cesar Ruiz was drafted to be a center. I understood last year, again with COVID-19, the inability to maybe put him at the center position. We know McCoy is an excellent center, but a guy that you know would probably be more suited to guard. Are you surprised that they did not flip-flop those guys? And is an open opportunity to maybe see if that happens in camp, even though they've said Ruiz is the guard?
Yeah, I'm a little surprised that it didn't happen, but I think circumstances kind of steered them in this direction. It's not out of the question that they could still make that swap, but I think that would be an indication that they're not happy with what
Ruiz
they're
was
seeing.
swimming last year. I mean, there's no doubt about that.
And I think the plan last year was to flip-flop them. You had no off-season program for the rookie to learn. He got nicked up in training camp and missed time, so it's kind of like, well, we got to go with McCoy. We'll let Ruiz kind of get up to speed behind Nick Easton. And he started to catch on a little bit during the season, but circumstances kind of dictated that they keep McCoy at center last year. And then I think the work that did get done last year was with Ruiz as a guard, and I don't know that they wanted to stop and move him back to center. They said, well, let's just ride this out and see where it goes.
They learned something from Andres Pete, probably.
I think that's probably a fair evaluation.
I really thought they really stymied his growth as a player by all the movement that they did early in his career. There's no doubt about that. $11.9 million under the cap now. They've gone from a team that was way over the cap in terms of number one and over the cap in the league to now 15th. Your anticipation on filling some of those needs that we talked about. Are they going to stay pat with the young players at the linebacker position and go with that? It's pretty obvious they need corners, and probably two. But again, especially one starting corner. Is it via trade, or is it going to be some of the guys that are still out there on free agency that are maybe waiting to hook up with the team now? How do you think they go about utilizing this $11.9 million, but more importantly, filling the last few holes they have going into camp?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of different ways they can go with this. I think free agency is probably going to be the way they address the remaining needs, although I'm sure they're exploring whatever trades might be out there. But important trades don't happen a lot in the NFL, and they don't happen this close to training.
And
nobody's
giving up big time corners in the NFL. Okay, you got one, you're holding on to.
Right, and teams have already figured out who they want to go into the season with at all positions, especially cornerback. So I think it's likely to be through free agency. I think cornerback, they have to have a list of priorities that in the best case scenario, cornerback is going to be number one. Wide receivers probably on that list. Linebacker may be on that list. Defensive tackle may be on that list, although it's really hard to find defensive tackles this time of year. Safety might even be on that list. I don't think they're going to be able to address all of those needs. I don't know if they'll be able to get multiple cornerbacks without sacrificing one of the other positions. So a lot of that's going to be dictated by who is out there, who wants to come here, what's it going to cost to get them. So that they're going to have a wish list that they're going to try and fill, but what the market presents to them is probably going to force them to adjust to what they're actually able to bring in. But I do believe cornerback is clearly the number one priority.
Ryan Ramczyk signs the richest deal for right tackle in the history of the NFL. As I mentioned, creates another $5.5 million in cap space, which puts them at about $11 million now. If you look into next year, okay, and I went through this last week with our guest, and I've done this on the radio show the last few weeks, and I think we've talked about it as well on the radio show. Lattimore, Armstead, Davenport, Winston, Taysom Hill, Marcus Williams, Patrick Robinson, P.J. Williams, Traquan Smith, Montgomery, Washington, Spence, Armont, all unrestricted. Harris, Tuttle, and Hanson, and there's a few other guys, but they got to make the team this year that are restricted. Do you utilize some of the money you have now, that $11.9 million, to maybe get some of your top guys under contract? And when I say that, Lattimore, you may have to wait on him and put him in a franchise tag next year, simply because of what's going on off the field.
Right.
Are you willing to be able to sign Marcus Williams long term? And then the other question is, again, now that you've signed Ramczyk to the richest deal for a right tackle, what is Armstead going to be looking for as he goes in, again, as he's 30 years old, I believe in July, and he is still one of the top left tackles in the NFL.
When healthy.
When healthy. Agreed.
Yeah.
Is that something they move this year to be able to sign him? And even, depending on, if you sign these guys this year, or and utilize some of that cap money that you have, maybe you're structuring that contract much like you did with Ramczyk and others, that you're getting cap relief to be able to sign other players, unlike what you couldn't do this year because of the drop in the salary cap because of COVID-19, and also, again, the dead money that you had with Drew Brees and others. Next year, again, you've got dead money with Drew Brees, but also you got dead money with Armstead if he walks away because he's been in a situation where he has renegotiated his contract so much over the last few years.
Yeah, I think in virtually all of those cases, I think in Davenport's case, they picked up the 5th-year option at the draft.
They did.
So they have a little latitude there. But I think in virtually all of those cases, those are players where they have to see what they get this year.
So you think it's a wait and see?
For the most part. Now,
Right.
Armstead, I think, is different than a lot of those guys.
He's $13.5 million in dead money next year.
Right. And he's the most important player on that list other than Jameis Winston. And he's proven he can play at a very high level. He's also missed a lot of time due to injury. He's also going to be 30. You could also move Ramczyk to the left side if you had to bring in a right tackle.
And you drafted a tackle. It was an all-SEC guy in was it Young?
Landon Young. So that is the most complicated one. That's one that.
And he's a leader, right?
Absolutely, he's a leader. He is one of the most important players in that locker room, and so he is someone they definitely want to keep long term. But his situation is kind of complicated and it's economically challenging.
Yeah.
So that's one that I think, if they were going to try and get something done long term, I think they would probably try and do it with him. 30 years old isn't that old for a tackle.
Really kind of getting into your prime when you're talking
even a
about
left tackle, that's not that old.
No.
So I think he is the guy they got to look at and say, boy, we got to figure out a way to make that work. Virtually everybody else, including Jameis Winston, is a situation where they say, I got to see what we have this year. You know, Lattimore has looked really good at times, but he's got the off the field thing.
To the point I made earlier, if you have a top corner, and he's a top 10 corner, do you let those guys walk out the door?
Well, you don't want to do that, but I think his situation, his second year, there was a little bit of a drop-off. He's been a little bit inconsistent since then. He's a very good player overall. I don't think this off-the-field issue back in Ohio is a huge thing, but it could be a 4-game suspension to start the season, theoretically at least. So his situation is complicated by that. But yeah, I think he is a priority to get done, but I'm not sure that that's something that gets done now.
Right. It's going to be an interesting camp. It's going to be a different camp than we've seen in a long, long time here in New Orleans.
Absolutely. And for all those reasons that we've talked about, the changing of the guard at quarterback, the veterans that they lost, the young players who have to step forward, perhaps 2 or 3 key contributors who are not yet on the roster. All of those things are a big issue, but the identity of the team is going to be a little different without Drew Brees. And part of that is going to be the offense is not going to be exactly the same. But, you know, Cam Jordan said this during OTAs is, you know, it's going to be on the defense to be a bigger part of this team's success than it has been in the past. And they've been a big part of it the last couple of years. And that's the other point is the majority of the free agent losses were on the defensive side of the ball. So Dennis Allen has a lot of work on his hands, but he does have a lot of talent to work with, but a lot of young talent to work with.
No doubt. Les East is with us, award-winning journalist on CrestCitySports.com, also Saturday Down South, and of course, an accomplished author as well, his brand new book. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we will talk about the Pelicans. We'll get into LSU and Tulane. You're watching Inside New Orleans Sports. Stick around.
Burkhart's Air Conditioning, Heating, and Refrigeration has been family-owned and operated since 1989. Burkhart has energy-efficient solutions and offers brands such as Mitsubishi ductless AC units and Amana, the only manufacturer with a lifetime unit replacement warranty. Burkhart's offers maintenance bundle packages that include servicing your AC, generator, and tankless water heater. For more information on the services Burkhart's provides, visit acpromise.com. Burkhart's Air Conditioning, Heating, and Refrigeration, providing comfort for life.
Experiencing rough weather with a bad roof can be a nightmare. It doesn't have to be.
Suburban Roofing, because when it comes to roofing, there is a difference.
Located at 3701 Iberville Street in Mid-City is Katie's Restaurant and Bar. Open 7 days a week, Katie's offers daily specials for lunch, dinner, and Sunday brunch. Serving New Orleans cuisine such as fried shrimp platters, grilled redfish, and a fully stocked bar. And don't forget about our expanded event seating and local entertainment. Featured on the Best of Food Network's diners, drive-ins, and dives, Katie's Restaurant and Bar.
Welcome back to Inside New Orleans Sports. I'm your host, Eric Asher. Today, Les East, award-winning journalist with us from CrescentCitySports.com. All right, we'll shift gears to the Pelicans. Whew, man, I'll tell you what a circus it's been over the last few weeks with the Pelicans. It started off, obviously, with the firing of Stan Van Gundy and the press conference from David Griffin, in which he gave his side of again, the story on why ultimately the situation with Stan Van Gundy did not work out. He called it a mutual parting of ways. This past week, over the last week, Van Gundy's been on 2 different podcasts, Stu Gatz and also Le Batard, 2 guys that he's worked with in the past before he got back into coaching. He was constantly on their particular radio show on ESPN. Both those guys now have their own individual podcasts, plus they work together. On the podcast, he said several things that really caught my ear. Zion is not a coach killer, okay? And that whether he got along with Brandon Ingram or not, he said that again, that he hates when a coach gets fired and it's put on the players, and the players look bad, it's unfair. He on Le Batard's podcast, he said that Griff was more concerned with the atmosphere around the team and the happiness of the people around in the organization than maybe was going on the floor. He did complain in both podcasts that the team was too young, that he walked in thinking he was going to have Drew Holiday and Favors and Etuan Moore, and they end up shipping those guys off, and he ends up with so many key contributors that were 23 and under. He also mentioned again that which I think we've all mentioned, 3 coaches in 3 years for the Zion rookie class, 4 coaches in 4 years for the Lakers for the Laker trade, those involved in the Lakers trade. And then he suggested also about continuity that Fred Vincent should be the next head coach of the New Orleans Pelicans. Shooting coach extraordinaire, never been a lead assistant, but has been here through several coaches, knows how the organization works, is beloved within the organization and by the players. Seems to be 2 different stories that are coming out now between Van Gundy and also David Griffin. Your thoughts?
Well, it certainly seems as though Griffin and Van Gundy were not on the same page. As much as Van Gundy and the players may not have been on the same page, it doesn't seem like the GM and the coach were on the same page. And usually when that's the case, there's enough blame to go around to both sides. I agree with most of what Van Gundy said. Zion Williamson is not a coach killer. The interesting thing about his comments on Brandon Ingram were he didn't say it's unfair to blame Brandon Ingram.
Right.
He spoke in a global sense.
Yes.
He said players sometimes get blamed for coaching changes, but ownership and front offices always make their own decisions. Sure. He never really addressed Brandon Ingram specifically.
Right. Whether they were getting along or not.
Right. So I think it's pretty clear.
He took the high road.
Yeah, he did. And to his credit, that there's no point in trashing a player on the way out the door.
No doubt.
But I think his comments kind of confirm what we already suspected, which was that he had a bigger problem getting through to Ingram than he did to Williamson. But ultimately, it just didn't work. It was a bad fit with the players. It was a bad fit with the GM.
Couldn't you see that coming, though, Les? I mean, come on. We talked about it on both the radio and TV shows, that going in the direction of an old-school coach who is in your face, caustic at times, and doing it in a COVID-19 year where you don't have the chance to get the best out of Van Gundy. Van Gundy's a teacher. And he's a guy to get you in the gym and get you better. They never had that opportunity was not even existent this past year in this hiring. That makes me again look, we all kind of questioned the hire when it happened, pulling him off the scrap heap, right? But then it makes you question it even more on, again, what was Griffin thinking to be able to bring Van Gundy in, knowing, again, today's young players are a little bit different. They're sensitive. They need to be coddled. And he's not a coddling coach. He didn't do that in Orlando. He didn't do that in Miami. He did that in Detroit. So you have to ask the question that when you say it wasn't a good fit, I agree with you, but shouldn't the Vice President of Basketball Operations have saw that going into this?
Well, you would hope. There are a couple of points relative to that. One is, I don't think, and this was true when Alvin Gentry was hired, I think it's true right now. We talked about this on the radio show. There was not a great pool of candidates. I don't remember saying at the time, I wondered about Stan Van Gundy at the time. I said, boy, I don't know. I think maybe he's past his time to be a really successful head coach in the NBA. But I don't recall saying they should have hired Coach X.
Right. But it's kind of the same pool right now, right?
Yeah, it is.
I mean, it's not much different.
No, in fact, I think they were right in thinking they had to admit the mistake and move on. But finding an upgrade is not going to be easy. Right. Hopefully they'll be able to do it. I think the generational thing will be solved at the very least. But I think another factor in it with the COVID thing, you're right. This is a guy who has a fairly complicated defensive scheme he wanted to teach. He teaches players a shortened season, shortened training camp, almost no full-scale practices in regular season. Doesn't allow him to play to his strengths. I think the consideration there may have partly been we have an unusual situation here because of COVID, short off season, truncated regular season. Do I want to bring in a young coach and make him a head coach for the first time and say, deal with this? Or do I want a guy who's been around the block a few times who maybe can handle the unusual circumstances more easily than a younger guy? That probably was not a wise calculation, but I think at the time that may have factored into it, and I can't say it was necessarily a bad line of thinking at the time, but it didn't work out.
As just mentioned, the pool of candidates has not really changed. I mean, you could question right now why it's taken so long, basically because 8 months ago, you had the resumes, you did the interviews. What's changed in 8 months with, again, these particular candidates? The only guy that's maybe been an addition to the mix here is Willie Greene, okay? And a lot of people believe he's going to be the front runner. Ex-Hornet for a year, a guy that everywhere he's been a leader. We're hearing great things about him as an assistant. Now the lead assistant under Monty Williams for the last two seasons. 2 seasons before that, 2 seasons with the Golden State Warriors on that bench when they won back-to-back championships. We know his pedigree as a leader on the floor as a player, but we don't know what he would be as a head coach. And the same thing can be said for Charles Lee going forward. If you wanted Chauncey Billups, you could say the same thing about Chauncey Billups. Okay, you got a lot of guys out there that are either ex-NBA players, which again it seems to be a lot of teams want to be gravitating to because players again can respect the form of the guys that have done it on the court. You mentioned the generational situation, getting someone younger and that they can relate to and they can respect. But again, with that comes the vacuum of lack of head coaching experience. And you can't get this one wrong, Les. This is it. I mean, again, you got 3 coaches in 3 years, and you got to this has got to be the hire. You and I have talked about it. I always thought Van Gundy had an expiration date. I didn't think he was going to be the guy that was going to take this team to a championship because I think at some point, again, he wears on a team, and that the next guy would kind of pick up, after his teaching and maybe take them to the next step. This is a quick turnaround now with guys that both. If we were to believe what the media is saying, that it's Lee or it's Greene, neither of those guys have head coaching experience.
No, they don't. But I don't think there's anybody out there with head coaching experience that I'm confident would be better than either of those 2 guys. That's just the situation they find themselves in. Here's what I think about Willie Greene.
You covered him when he was with the Hornets.
Yeah, he was a great guy, great locker room guy, great teammate. I've never heard anybody say anything except
Never.
very positive.
You hear
stuff
what Chris
about
Paul's saying about him right now. He doesn't have a bigger lobbyist than Chris Paul right now.
Yeah. And I think he is, my gut feeling is that he is the front runner, although maybe not by a large margin. That's just a gut feeling. There's no inside information. I believe he played 10 years in the NBA. That gives him instant credibility with the players. The generational thing, as you mentioned, he'll be able to communicate better, I think, with the players. You look at, he has learned with Steve Kerr and Monty Williams. And Mike Buchholzer at Milwaukee is a good coach.
Yes.
I think Monty Williams is a better coach.
I agree.
I think Steve Kerr is a better coach. So if you're looking at the tutelage the two have received, speaking of Charles Lee and Willie Greene,
Yes.
I would give Willie Greene a slight edge there as well. And it just kind of seems like he is sort of emerged late. And the delay, I think, seems pretty clear that because those two are in the finals,
Yes.
that's
You would think
what it
that's
is.
the delay.
Now, maybe Fred Vinson's a fallback position if they don't get either of the other two. But I get the feeling that Willie Greene is the front runner, is most likely to be the guy. And I wouldn't criticize that choice at the time. But if you look, since Griffin's been here, he immediately extended Alvin Gentry.
Right.
Bad idea.
Yes.
Fired Alvin Gentry. Had to be done, I think, at that time, but no firing can be judged until you see what the replacement does. It has to bring about an upgrade.
Right.
That was a bad move because Van Gundy was not an upgrade.
Yes.
I think they had to fire Van Gundy, but you can't say that's a good move until you see how the replacement does. So Griffin hasn't gotten any major coaching decision right yet. He has to get this one right, and he has to nail it.
I've said this on the radio show, and I believe here as well, hottest of hot seats, he's on it. I mean, again, I don't think you get another chance here. I don't think you get another shot to be able to hire another coach. When you look at this, does he need to make a splash, whether that be in the trade market, bringing in another all-star, okay? Or, again, a splash within the draft? Does he need to make a splash to be able to get back the fan base, the confidence of the fan base? Look, almost to a person that I've spoken with or that has reached out to me via social media or via email, they've lost confidence in David Griffin. Okay, they feel like, again, that, I mean, the overriding comment has been snake oil salesman. Okay, that's not a good thing for a guy that is leading an organization. Then you have to worry about, man, you surely don't want to get, we saw Dell Demps, right, on a hot seat. And we saw him doing everything he could to try to save his job, mortgaging the future if he had to. Man, there's a treasure chest of draft choices that was supposed to be able to take this team, as they're growing, over the next 7 years or so. Is there a possibility that, again, that he may be feeling that, and that you don't want guys making decisions based on their own longevity?
No, you don't. Now, I think David Griffin, and I'm less confident in his ability now than I was when he was hired, because the first 2 years have not gone well.
Right.
But I still think he knows what he's doing,
Okay.
and he is an unusually thoughtful person.
Agreed.
And so I don't think he looks at things as feeling pressure from the outside. And you hear people say this all the time, the only pressure I feel is from within. But I think in his case, it's true. The only splash he has to make, and I think it's the only splash he recognizes, is that he has to hire a coach and reshape this roster so that the Pelicans easily get into the playoffs next year and have a realistic chance of advancing in the playoffs. If he does that, Zion Williamson will be happy. If he does that, his job will be more secure. And if he does that, it'll be easier to continue building that. So all the other stuff gets taken care of if he gets the right coach.
Right.
And then he explores whether it's a trade or a free agency or the draft or some combination. If he just makes the best personnel decisions that are among the options available to him, then they will make a splash because he has a lot of talent on that roster, a lot of assets to work with. So if he gets the right coach, reshapes the roster properly to mesh with that coach so they have a successful season next year, all this other stuff goes away.
You always want to be moving forward. You don't want to be in a situation where you're trying to make up for bad deals or bad decisions that you've made in the past. And it looks like this is going to be a year where you got to kind of go back and make up for the bad decisions that you made over the last couple seasons. And i.e., again, multiple coaching changes. Bringing in a Bledsoe and an Adams that maybe, again, Bledsoe doesn't want to be here. Adams maybe is not a fit, where both of those guys are taking up a large chunk of your salary cap. It's going to be interesting to see, again, how this plays out. And because he's under a microscope, more of a microscope than maybe he was under when he came here, because a lot of that was the luster, there was a lot of optimism because of Zion. Okay? And that kind of carried it, the fan base, and of those that were looking from the outside in. He's on the hottest of hot seats. We'll see ultimately how that's going to play out. Switch to LSU. First of all, again, brand new head coach on the baseball side. Jay Johnson of Arizona comes in. He takes over. He has brought in now Dan Fitzgerald of Dallas Baptist, considering an up-and-coming assistant, a future head coach. He's been named recruiting coordinator. He names the former Arizona State pitching coach, Jason Kelly, as his new pitching coach. Oh, by the way, he brings with him All-American freshman Jacob Berry, who's now following him to LSU, who's knocking the cover off the ball for the USA right now. It looks like on the surface, even though it isn't that splash hire that everybody was looking for, looks like a pretty good hire right now.
Yeah, I think it's a very solid hire, and I'm not sure who the splash hire would have been. You know, I think there was certainly reason to look at Mike Bianco.
Right.
And that didn't work out for timing as much as anything else. But I'm not sure. He has a longer resume, and he has an LSU connection, multiple LSU connections. But I'm not sure that he would have been a more impressive hire than Jay Johnson if you look at what they did.
But what about the Vandy coach or the Florida coach? Those were the ones with the hot names early.
Yeah, but can you get them?
Right, and they couldn't.
Yeah, and they couldn't get them. Right. So, you know, you can't criticize somebody for not hiring somebody who didn't want to come. So I think among the people they could have hired, this guy's probably as good as they could have gotten. I didn't know much about him before his name surfaced at LSU. I've learned a lot about him since then. And
since you've learned a lot about him, what is your opinion?
Well, a couple of things jump out that I think LSU fans should be excited with. I think you probably have to go back to the Skip Bertman era to find a hitting coach that satisfied the majority of LSU fans. Yeah. Whenever things go bad, it's always fire the hitting coach. Yeah. This guy has a track record of developing players, especially hitters.
True.
And now he's bringing the Berry kid with him. And so I think the expectation, the realistic expectation that he will upgrade the hitting on the team, I think is something that should be music to LSU fans' ears. The other thing is he seems unusually meticulous in his preparation. They talk about the way he delves into scouting reports, conducts batting practice tailored to the pitching staff of the upcoming opponent in terms of facing lefties and righties and breaking balls and fastballs, and the detail to which with which he prepares his team seems to be unusually skillful. And so I think that should serve him extremely well. Certainly bringing the freshmen with him, the coaching staff looks pretty solid that he's brought with him so far. And let's not forget, Paul Maneri's leaving him a lot of young talent to work with. So I think LSU fans should be very excited about next baseball season.
Maybe if you could say there's one area of need, it would be the pitching staff. And again, we'll see. He's supposed to be a pretty good recruiter. We'll see how that plays out. Got about 3 minutes left. So let's do a little thumbnail on both Tulane and LSU's football team. Start with Tulane. Your thoughts going into this season?
Well, a lot of question marks. I think they've generally been on an upward trajectory, or at least a plateau last season. Since Willie Fritz has been there, they haven't really taken a step back. But I think there's more. They're similar to the Saints in that I think there's more uncertainty this season. You have new coordinators. You have some key losses on the defense, which was really strong last year. You have a very good young quarterback to operate around in skill positions on offense. So there's a lot to work with there. So I think they're capable of maintaining the success they have, but I think the key for them going forward is they have to make a jump this year or next year, where 7-6 and going to a bowl in mid-December is nice, but it's time to compete for a conference championship. Don't know if they're ready for that this year, but if they have another winning record and make that leap next year, I think that's fine.
What about LSU?
I think LSU has an opportunity to be much better than it was last year. I think the key to this season is they have an almost entirely new assistant coaching staff, new defensive coordinator, defensive line, linebacker, offensive coordinator, passing game coordinator, offensive line. I don't think I forgot anybody. And in the common thread among most, if not all of those guys, is that, as we talked about the Pelicans, younger coaches who they think can relate better to the players, who I think are more in tune with modern day concepts within the sport. And if those guys, there's every reason to think those guys are going to do a good job. If they are appreciably better than the people they replaced, LSU could maybe be the second best team in the West. They are Texas A&M, Ole Miss may be a dark horse. But if it turns out they just have younger coaches and not better coaches, then they could be kind of middle of the pack. So I think how those coaches interact with and coach up their players is going to be the key to this season. I do think that the players are enthusiastic about those coaches, and I think they are excited about playing for them. And of course, the quarterback's going to get a lot of attention, but I think they're in good shape with either one of those guys.
Les, as always, appreciate your time very, very much. One more time, tell the folks about your book.
Thanks. Donkeys, Elephants, and Giraffes, about politics and media, and to some degree, sports. And it's go to barnesandnoble.com, amazon.com, Google it. Lots of ways you can get it. Check it out and give me some feedback on social media.
Beautiful. And of course, you can catch him on CrescentCitySports.com and Saturday Down South. Does a great job for both those publications. Thanks so much for tuning in. Remember, plenty of ways to be able to catch this program now. We were so fortunate to be able to have so many ways that you can catch our show. The first rebroadcast of this program is at 6 p.m. tonight on WLAE-TV 2, 10 p.m. on the Deuce WLAE-TV on WLAE-TV 2. Also on Friday nights, 9 o'clock, Pelican Sports Television, 10 o'clock on WLAE, Saturday morning at 2 a.m. on the Deuce, and then Saturday afternoon at 5 p.m. on Pelican Sports Television. Always on the WLAE-TV YouTube page, always at ericasher.com, and always on our social media platforms at Eric_Asher and Eric Asher on Facebook. Also want to thank the WLE production staff, which does a great job here on the program. Also want to remind everybody about the radio show. You can catch me on the radio. That is 4 to 6 weekdays on 106.1 FM. Listen live at ericasher.com. Our podcast is on the Anchor podcasting platform, but we're on all podcasting platforms now, so you can catch the show there as well. Again, special thanks to Les East, as mentioned, our WLE production staff, and also, again, our fantastic underwriters that underwrite this program. Ron Yeager, Jim Dotson, also Will Ingram, as well as Alex Chacon, and the best director in the business, Will Hill. My name is Eric Asher for Les East. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you next week for another edition of Inside New Orleans Sports.